Hey everybody, welcome to Raising the Bar for Adventure Guiding. This is the basic level introductory course for Great Guides. All guides that want to offer trips on our site need to go through this module and will need to pass an assessment based upon the material that is in this module. My name's Dan Moore. I'm the guide team lead for Great Guides. I'd love it if you would stay in touch with me either via email or using my phone number to send me a WhatsApp message or an iMessage. I'm happy to correspond with you regarding best practices for guiding, any questions you might have about the travel industry, and of course your role here at Great Guides. You can also follow me on Twitter at DintyDan, where I post information about the travel industry that might be of interest to you. I'm based in Seattle, Washington in the United States, but I'm frequently traveling around the world. So if I am in your backyard, it'd be great to connect with you. So like I said, please be in touch. The first section of this module is called, Can Guides Save the World? And Why Should We Care? These are two very important questions, and I think a big reason why we are all involved in the adventure travel industry is because we have a concern about our communities and about the environment and want to make a difference. Key takeaways of this section will be to identify characteristics of a quality adventure travel guide and to be familiar with the adventure travel guide standard and its 5 core competencies. I want people to understand the definitions that we're using here at Great Guides and current trends in adventure tourism. So let's get started. First, important question, what is adventure travel? Great Guides is operating in the adventure travel space. We are marketing your trips around the world as though they are adventure tourism experiences. And we subscribe to the definition that the Adventure Travel Trade Association uses for what is adventure travel. And that is there are 3 components to adventure travel. And any quality experience needs to have at least 2 of these, but preferably all 3. The first one is obvious. That's the physical activity. That's where you are bicycling, hiking, trekking, walking, kayaking, canoeing, rafting, hang gliding, primarily any physical activity where you're using human power to propel yourself. The second is perhaps less obvious, but equally important, and that is cultural exchange. So adventure travel is not just outdoor recreation. Adventure travel is where you are interfacing with other people in their communities and learning from them and sharing with them. This could be indigenous cultures. This could be food and beverage. This could be storytelling and lore, many ways that cultural exchange can occur. The third component of adventure travel is interaction with the environment. This means that you're out in nature or you're observing the beauty and or wildlife that is found in the location. And all 3 of these have to do with getting you connected to the place. So travel is not just for fun. It's about getting people connected. So the 3 components are physical activity, cultural exchange, and interaction with the environment. Adventure travel does not have to be extreme, and that is important. And that's why, whereas we are promoting Great Guides as adventure tourism, we're also being careful to not make it seem like our trips are out of the reach of normal travelers. And in fact, 99% of what we will offer will not be anything at all extreme. And most of it will be what we refer to as soft adventures. So what does that mean? One person's soft adventure is another person's hard adventure. And that's where these things get a little bit tricky because adventure is relative. Authentic is more important than extreme. So again, connecting travelers to the place is what's key. And as I stated already, soft adventure is the majority of what's happening in our industry and the vast majority of what will be happening here at Great Guides. So hard adventure, soft adventure, what does all that mean? So let's start with hard adventure. Hard adventure is anything that needs prior experience prior to the program and or would include in-depth training. So that's anything roped, anything that is technical or gear intensive. but it also has to do with the duration or the distance traveled. So like an expedition would be considered hard adventure. Soft adventure needs little training just to get started and perhaps none at all. And so examples would be hiking or trekking, ecotourism like bird watching, wildlife viewing. Of course, cultural immersion would be soft adventure. Now, there are plenty of examples of scalable where you could maybe have entry-level activities, but at some point, depending on the scale, would require more experience. So that could be bicycling, either road or mountain biking. Almost anybody can get on a bike and do a short bike trip, but if you're going to be doing 50 to 70 kilometers a day, you're probably going to need a little bit more experience. The same would be for kayaking, as well as whitewater rafting, maybe, depending upon the duration, and as well as horse riding. So adventure travel is being studied quite a bit by the Adventure Travel Trade Association, and they've done quite a few studies on this. The first one was in 2009 when they determined that the market for adventure tourism was $89 billion. Well, by 2012, that had catapulted all the way up to $263 billion industry, which is a pretty significant jump. Well, between 2012 and 2017, the industry has more than doubled to $683 billion. That's a huge leap between 2009 and 2017. So it's a rapidly growing industry. You can compare it to the cruise industry, global textile, and prescription drug sales. International adventure travel market is a contender on the world stage for sure. 4 in 10 travelers are choosing adventure or chose adventure on their last trip. So that doesn't mean that they're doing adventure throughout their vacation. They might be going on a kayak trip as part of their cruise to Alaska, or they might be going on a city bicycle tour as part of their trip to the capitals of Europe. But the point is that people are choosing adventure and adventure activities when they travel. One reason why adventure tourism is actually gaining a lot of traction within governments as well as within communities is that there's a strong ethos with adventure tourism. In order for adventure tourism to happen, you need to have collaboration. That requires companies working together, regions working together. Of course, collaboration requires trust. And so this is important for the adventure travel industry, that businesses recognize they may be in competition with each other, but they need to trust each other. And we'll be going over reasons for that shortly. The adventure travel industry is well connected and bonded to each other through their community. And some reference this as the adventure tribe, referencing indigenous tribes and communities as a model for how this community survives throughout as a global industry. And the key aspect here, which again we're going to be talking a lot more about, is sustainability. We do not have an industry if we don't have nature and adventure locations to visit. If they're destroyed by mining or logging or habitat degradation, we don't have adventure tourism. There's no cultural exchange if the community has been destroyed due to our actions. So sustainability is at the heart of the ethos for adventure tourism. So I always like to bring up the question, why? Why should we care? Why is adventure tourism something that GreatGuides is focusing on? Why is it something that you might want to be focusing more on? Well, our role as a guide has evolved from showing people the route from point A to point B, and it's now helping people find the path to connect to their place, the story, and ultimately the purpose for traveling. And so this shift in the role of the guide is huge, and it's a big reason why I've been engaged with defining new standards for adventure travel guides, and why we're at GreatGuides are focusing so much on this onboarding process as a key differentiator for our business. the Adventure Travel Guide Standard, which you'll be learning about shortly, states that an excellent guide in one destination can raise the bar for the industry, while a less competent guide in another can just as easily set the industry back. So again, this is that collaboration and trust part of the ethos that I was talking about. That if we, even if your competitor down the road from you, you of course are excited for your business to grow, but not at the cost of your competitor having an accident or doing something so terrible that your whole destination, and in fact our whole industry, gets looked at poorly because of that. So this is a key aspect of adventure travel ethos, and why we focus so much on guide training. Here is my colleague Jean-Claude, who runs a travel business in Brazil. He says, adventure guides encourage and inspire a love of nature and nurture an adventurous spirit. And this is very solid words that I subscribe to as well. And he goes on, these values are an antidote to some of the most vexing problems of the modern world. So again, getting people out into nature, having an outdoor adventure and connecting with other cultures, these are very important aspects that can really help us tackle some of the challenges our communities are facing. Ninos Mills was a visionary way ahead of his time. He lived from 1870 to 1922, and he wrote a groundbreaking book that is still relevant today called The Adventures of a Nature Guide. And Mills says the effective interpreter has the faculty of being entertaining, instructive, watchful, and commanding, all without his party realizing it. So again, the ability of a guide to have all these powerful traits, but to the eyes of the audience, they don't even realize that all this is going on behind the scenes. That's powerful. He goes on, a day with a guide may help to train the eyes and all of the senses. So this is similar to what Jean-Claude was saying in the previous quote, just about getting people out, seeing things that they didn't see before, being aware and paying attention in ways that maybe they hadn't done before. A guide has been rightfully associated with information and some form of education, but guiding is more inspirational than informational. And this is key to a great guide's trip, is that we, of course, want you to be able to share quality information and connect people to the destination in ways that just traveling on their own would never accomplish. But even more important than the information is that they're going home inspired. Their life was changed. They're ready to take on some of those challenges in the world. They're ready to make the world a better place. So that is a key aspect of being a guide in the modern day. And again, the fact that Ninos Mills was saying this in 1920 says a lot for how visionary he was. So we're going to be talking a bit about guide standards, and so it's good to ask the question, why do they matter? Well, for one, the industry is demanding higher quality. As we've already stated, adventure travel is a rapidly growing industry, and it's increased competition locally, but especially internationally. So you might be located in Chile, and your guests might be traveling from South Africa earlier in the year, and they had amazing guides in South Africa, and so they're expecting that to their expectations of their trip in Chile to be at that same caliber. Additionally, because our industry is growing so much, it's gaining more attention as well for emphasis on safety. So governments are regulating the industry. The destinations are more exposed when an accident happened, and not just the destination, but our whole industry is more exposed for that. And because in order to operate, insurance is a requirement, insurance is also requiring us to have a greater attention and emphasis on safety. So I did some research in 2014. I was hired by the Adventure Travel Trade Association to determine what exactly is happening for guide standards as well as guide training and resources throughout the globe. Well, This is just an overview of some of the different areas of the world that I was able to interview companies and professionals in the industry. But in general, what you would expect is that there's not a global approach to guide standards, or there wasn't at the time, and there wasn't a global approach to training and resources for guides. And so without standard guide qualifications and without a standard approach to training, what we determined was that certifications and training that existed focused primarily on technical skills. So again, if you're a rock climbing guide, you're going to have great, hopefully, certifications and training on setting anchors and on how to teach belaying and abseiling and rappelling, but there was little to no emphasis on interpretation, meaning content delivery, or group management or sustainability. And these are core aspects of being a guide. So the Adventure Travel Trade Association put together a working group that I facilitated with representatives from 18 different countries. They were all mostly guides or people who currently work professionally or had worked professionally as a guide in the past. And over the course of 10 months, we crafted the first international adventure travel guide standard. So at the core of the adventure travel guide standard are a guide's core responsibilities. So again, despite diversity in industry, no matter what part of the world you're located in, what activities you do, who you serve, there are three core responsibilities that every guide is responsible for. Number one is to consider sustainability. So again, we don't have anywhere to guide if your communities are not benefiting from tourism and or are harmed or hurt. There's not cultural exchange. We don't have anywhere to guide if we don't have nature or trails or environmental habitat. So sustainability is absolutely number one, that we need to make all of our decisions with sustainability in mind. So that sometimes means that the customer is not always right, and we'll go over how we deal with that situation. But importantly, sustainability, number one. Number two, of course, we don't have adventure tourism if people are dying or getting hurt all the time. Great Guides does not have a great reputation if we have safety issues. But safety is not necessarily just the incident itself, it's the perception. So we have to communicate very effectively with our customers about why what we're doing is safe and how we've allowed the activities that are being offered to be offered. What is the protocol we went through? So sometimes that's just perception and communication. And then finally is the quality of the experience. And again, we don't have any, we don't change anybody's lives if we have terrible customer service or if the content that we're delivering is non-factual or non-existent. And so the quality and the meaning of the trip are all key aspects of delivering a great guided trip. So this group got together and also determined that there are 5 core competencies for being an adventure travel guide. So, and at the time of this recording, this standard is being revised, but for the time being, we will reference the original standard that was released in 2015. And it referenced 5 core competencies that, again, no matter where in the world you are, what kind of activities you're doing, or who your audience is, every competent guide needs to have some degree of competency in these areas. So the first is technical. Again, this seems obvious, and this was what there was a lot more that existed in terms of certifications and requirements. But this would says that all guides need to possess technical ability to safely carry out the activities that are offered. So if you are a kayak guide, you don't need to have top rope certification because you're not necessarily doing climbing trips as well. But you would need to consider having specific certifications for being in water. So that could be kayak certification from either the British Canoe Union or American Canoe Association or whatever your local certifying body would be. You also need to follow local and national regulations. So again, you don't need to follow regulations from the U.S. if you're based in Iceland, but you do need to follow regulations that are in Iceland. And this is key. And we are going to be very specific about this with Great Guides, because we get a bad reputation if we have people running rogue around the world. Maybe you're doing an activity or in your region there is not a identified certification or license or regulation you must obtain. That doesn't mean you're off the hook. You need to determine protocol that is going to be relevant to the activities you're doing and the locations you're guiding in, and have that documented. There are some skills that are universal. We'll go over that. So observe protocol specific to your company, which would be you and Great Guides, location and activities, and to receive training and licenses specific to equipment and vehicles used. A lot of times these licenses and regulations are different for a commercial operation versus just the general public. So this is key. You might need a permit to guide in your location that the general public could just go up and go there without a permit. So be aware of that. So we have both activity-specific skills and universal technical skills. So universal technical skills, all guides need to have this. All guides need to be able to navigate using both GPS as well as map and compass. Even if you're mostly just hiking on trails, you still need to have that as a skill set. You need to understand meteorology. The weather is a key factor in outdoor activities, and weather can change abruptly. And if we're not aware of being able to read that, that could be a safety hazard. Safety and risk management is key, as well as natural phenomena evaluation. The second core competency is wilderness medicine and first aid, which in essence is part of a technical aspect. But in this first iteration of the Adventure Travel Guide Standard, we called it out specifically in order to emphasize this protocol. So if you are leading nature walks in the middle of a city and you can call emergency medical response and they can be there within a few minutes, you need basic first aid and CPR just to keep someone alive until that time. If you're operating a safari trek out in the middle of Rwanda, and the nearest hospital or doctor care is hours away, if not longer, you need to have wilderness medicine. And so this is determined by the protocol that exists. The Wilderness Medical Society, for example, sets protocol for how much training you need to have depending on how far away you are from what's called definitive care. Number 3 is customer service and group management. So this is guides trained with an emphasis on customer service. Again, we are in the hospitality industry, and we're not going to change anybody's lives if they hate their experience. And we also, even though the customer is not always right, the customer wants to believe they're always right. And so this is where the art form comes in. Fourth competency is natural and cultural history interpretation, or you could also refer to this as content delivery. So what is it about your local area, the natural or cultural history that you're going to share with guests? This is what people are traveling for. They want to get to know that. So you need to be knowledgeable about it and be able to present information accurately. But just knowing it isn't enough. You also need to know how to deliver that information. And so that's the interpretation sometimes is the term used to refer to that. And so thinking about educational techniques that you're going to use to share this content with the guests, this is key. Sustainability. As I said, this is the number one core responsibility for an adventure travel guide, is to be aware of sustainability. In the Adventure Travel Guide Standard, we refer to leave no trace, which is the 7 principles of of Leave No Trace, which are listed here, but we also acknowledge that in the travel industry, we have a Beyond Leave No Trace aspect, which was conceived in 2009. And so again, reading more specifically into that is key. Also in sustainability, there are some principles in ecotourism and adventure travel. For example, the Adventure Travel Trade Association has a published ethos that they expect all of their members to adhere to. GreatGuides is a member of the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And sustainability is not just about nature. Obviously, it's about protecting and preserving our cultures and our communities. And so that is using appropriate language. That is being respectful of practices when interacting with local people. And of course, we also, being in the travel industry, are on the front lines of seeing some pretty bad stuff that happens, whether that's poaching of animal parts. It's also, we are on the front lines of seeing children and sex workers being trafficked as well. And so, whereas that's not our core aspect of delivering a trip, we need to be aware that if we see something that is inappropriate like that, that we have an outlet to report that to. So after all that, the Adventure Travel Guide is an athlete, a diplomat, a teacher, an environmentalist, a doctor, and most importantly, the Adventure Travel Guide is you. And are you up for that challenge? Well, you're listening to this right now, so I imagine you are. So let's go on to section 2. This is exceeding the increasing expectations of the modern traveler. So if we want to change the world, if we want to have profound, fantastic experiences, and if we, quite frankly, want to stay in business and do well in that respect, we are going to be exceeding expectations, not just meeting them. We need to blow them away. So key takeaways here is to understand why customer service for adventure is more complex due to safety considerations. We'll discuss Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We'll learn techniques to exceed expectations and to differentiate between physical and emotional expectations. So from the Adventure Travel Guide Standard, customer service is obviously one of the core competencies. The customer is not always right, and this is a key aspect here, and this is due to safety and due to sustainability. Another goal for customer service is to instill a connection to the destination. So this is different than than other hospitality sectors like lodging or restaurants, where really a key aspect is in those settings is just making the customer happy. Well, we have greater goals in our industry. As you know, GreatGuides is just starting out, and we're working really hard to bring you business, and it's going to take us a long time to build the credibility and to earn customers. And this is where we're all on the same team here. It will take us months to find a customer, and it will only take seconds to lose it. So that's why we are investing so much in this opportunity to interact with you and help you understand what GreatGuides is about, and hopefully share information that is useful to you in improving your guiding. In adventure travel, as I said, if the customer was always right, they wouldn't all come back alive. And obviously, we're going to work really hard to keep people safe, keep them happy, and sometimes that requires us saying no. The other challenge in adventure travel is that our goal is not to keep people comfortable. If it was, then we'd be offering, sit on the beach with a beer under an umbrella activities, and that's not very exciting or adventurous. What we're trying to do is get people out of the comfort zone, but not so far out that they're in what's called the terror zone. So this is, again, part of the art form, is to know where people's comfort zone is and how to gently push them outside of it, but again, not push them too far. Here's some basics in customer service, and my assumption is that most of you are well aware of this already, otherwise you wouldn't even be in business, but let's just make sure that we're all on the same page. First, great customer experiences are deliberate, planned, and consistent. Well, what else? What else is important to offering great customer service? To answer that, you have to understand what are people's basic expectations. Maslow, who is a psychologist and a researcher in the 20th century, came up with what he called the Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And so this is basically saying that if you're not meeting needs that are lower down on this pyramid, you're never going to get to that place of self-transcendence, of life-changing. And so we need to account for those basic needs, safety needs, first and foremost. Now, in our industry, this may sound like it conflicts with the previous bullseye where we're trying to get people out of their comfort zone. Well, clearly that might include depriving them some of their basic needs, but that's where the expectations is key. If you're doing a winter activity, people might get cold, but they need their basic needs met in terms of having the proper gear to wear, having warm beverage, having snacks and things like that. So let's dive in here on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, especially starting with the basic safety and physiological needs. So our basics are air, water, food, and rest. So think about, are you operating at elevation? Do you have extra water to share with your guests? Did you bring snacks and or provide meals for them? Where are the restrooms and when are bathroom breaks? You might know in your head that we have a stop in 2 hours on our drive to the trailhead, but the guest doesn't know. And if they're thinking about, well, what if I have to use the bathroom, and they're not going to be available to listen to any of the content you're sharing with them. In fact, they might not even be appreciating the scenery on that journey. And what about is the intensity of the physical activity? Is it appropriate for the group? So these are all questions to consider with these basics: air, water, food, and rest. Next up on the physiological needs is clothing and shelter. So again, it's supposed to be bad weather doing adventure travel from time to time. That doesn't mean that you fail, but if you haven't communicated the weather appropriately, then you might have failed. You need, as the guide, need to be bringing extra gear just in case. If somebody didn't bring a raincoat and it's going to rain, well, ideally you warn them ahead of time to bring rain gear, but have an extra piece just in case. And this is a lesson I learned the hard way. What are your plans B and C? What are you going to do when the rain is so bad that you can't complete the hike you had planned for the day? What are you going to do if you had planned to do an activity in the snow, but you haven't had any snow yet this year? So having alternative plans is key. Moving up in Maslow's pyramid, you go on to safety needs. And remember what I talked about safety earlier. Sometimes safety isn't just having the proper gear and knowing how to use it. It's communicating to your guests that you have the proper gear and you know how to use it, so that their perception of safety is ultimately as important as that safety actually exists. So thinking about the environmental hazards that you communicated and as well as mitigated for. Have you explained clearly the safety procedures? Is there trust in your ability to keep people safe? So that's that perception piece. If you show up and your vehicle looks like crap, your people aren't probably going to say, I don't know if I trust that thing, even if you just had it tuned up and it's been approved by the government. Similarly, your appearance is going to, if you're dressed in clothing that is clean and well cared for, people are going to assume that your safety equipment is clean and well cared for as well. Safety needs are relative. So people who have done high adventure activities are going to understand how gear works, what safety equipment works. People who've never done anything like that before are going to for sure need to understand some of those basics. So the expectations of the modern traveler, most of these low-level Maslow needs are regarding physical expectations. So is the person hot? Are they cold? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they wet? Sunburned, etc. So to manage those physical expectations, again, do they have appropriate gear? Do you have snacks and water for them? Is it possible to vary the difficulty of the activity in case you have a group that is either more adventurous or less athletic? So moving up into the next level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we first go to love and belongingness. This includes friendship, intimacy, trust, and acceptance. So do the participants feel that they're part of the group? Do they feel that you, the guide, cares about them? How? How do you convey that to them, that you care about them? Do they trust you with their emotions? Because I'm sure all of you have had opportunities where people are outside of their comfort zone a little bit. They're in beautiful, amazing settings. They've just accomplished something major, and they are ready to share with you. Have you conveyed a sense of empathy, or that their concerns are your concerns? These are all part of the love and belongingness, part of psychological needs. Moving up would be esteem needs. So these are this includes respect from others. So does the language you use, is it conveying that you have respect for the people, that you're not just their guide, but that you respect them as humans? And so think about, can you create an environment that maximizes this, that helps people, not just you, but the other participants in the group? Well, the other thing is to think about is respect for self. So how does travel and adventure activities help the traveler grow their self-confidence? And does this sense of accomplishment lead to greater transformation? Later in Maslow's life, he added a few needs to this higher level. One is the cognitive and aesthetic need. So that's the curiosity, exploration, the need to come to understand the meaning and have understanding for bigger picture elements and concepts. So how are you giving your guests a greater understanding of your destination? Do they feel a sense of curiosity and a desire to learn more by being on this trip with you? And then secondly is the appreciation and search for beauty. This is a core higher level need that Maslow have identified. And so have you included time to reflect and to appreciate? Have you given them an opportunity to just appreciate the surroundings and have the time to absorb the nature and the cultures? So then we get up to that top pyramid, and that's self-actualization and transcendence. And there is a lot of evidence that's pointing to that core motivation for people to travel right now is to have that life-changing experience, so that when they realize something about themselves, when they have completed this travel. So is your trip a series of activities, or is it a journey? Just a series of activities is not going to be life-changing. It's just going to be what's next on the itinerary. But if it's a journey, if you're connecting all the parts of it, it has that opportunity to take people to another level. How are you helping the guests to seek this personal growth? Are you asking them questions along the way? Are you giving them time to reflect? Are you, what are you doing that might facilitate this personal growth? Another aspect of self-actualization and transcendence is to inspire to help others. So this is really key when we're talking about sustainability. If people are seeing brilliant wilderness areas or wildlife that is threatened or so important to ecosystems, or if they're recognizing that by traveling to the area, they're helping support communities that are struggling, they might go home and want to continue to support those causes. They might want to inspire their friends to travel as well and to learn about this. So this is a key part of this peak level. And again, if they're starving, freezing, feel like they're not safe with you, feel like you don't care about them, they're never going to get to this point. 50% of the customer experience is emotional. So if you provide customers with an emotionally engaging experience, The rest will take care of itself. That was Colin Shaw in 2007. So let's think about the emotional expectations of the modern traveler. So is the person afraid? Are they excited? Are they lonely, angry, sad, anxious, happy? These are all emotions that are sometimes harder to understand versus the physical, but as was just stated, equally as important for a life-changing experience. So to manage those expectations, try to evaluate the emotional state using cues such as facial expressions, body language, word choices. Is somebody standing in the corner, folding their arms, not looking at you? Do they look like they're about to cry? Are they telling jokes and super happy and having a great time? And these are ways that you can determine people's emotional expectations. But sometimes it's not obvious. You have to ask questions. Hey, how are you feeling about this? You don't need to ask in front of the whole group. You can pull someone aside and say, hey, I just want to see, are you going to be comfortable with the bike ride today? We do have options in case you're not, so don't worry at all. And try and get inside their head. And this is a key part about empathy. So think about if this was your first time visiting your destination or doing this activity, how might you feel? So let's take a hypothetical trip like a mountain biking trip. What would be the physical expectations of different spots? So let's take the trip meeting point. So obviously a physical expectation is the guide's going to be there and be there on time, which actually means are you early? Because you're going to need to get somewhere long before the guests get there in case they arrive earlier than you. Is the meeting point easy to find? If they're frazzled because they wandered all over the place trying to find where to meet you, they're not going to be ready to take care of any of those higher level expectations. So again, mountain biking, the physical expectations of the biking equipment, that the bike works, it's well maintained, it looks like it's a quality bike, and it meets the stated specifications. So if somebody is 1.2 meters tall and you've got a bike designed for a 2 meter tall person, that's not going to work. Similarly, if you claim that you've got a full suspension mountain bike and you show up and you just have front shocks, that's not going to work. What are some physical expectations for the guide? Well, how about the guide will be competent, qualified, suitably experienced? Will probably look to dress the part as well, maybe wearing a uniform that matches your company logo or is at least clean and well presented. So physical expectations about medical issues. So have people's medical issues been clearly conveyed to you? And are you qualified in first aid and wilderness medicine if necessary? A lot of times that's just important just to share with the guests. I always tell them I have a first aid kit. I'm trained in wilderness first responder. Pull me aside if you have any issues and I'll do the best I can to help you. So what about the emotional expectations? So this is a little bit harder to read, and it's going to take a little bit more perception on our part. We can't be freaking out about the itinerary later in the day. We need to be focused and present. So let's think about that from the trip meeting point. What expectations emotionally might people be feeling? So they might be nervous about the trip because they're wondering if they're going to be the right skill level. They've probably just paid a good amount of money for this mountain biking experience. They want to know if it's worth the money. Biking equipment. So the emotional expectations would be that you would take the time to make sure the bike fits and that that it's clear that if there are any issues with the bike that you're happy to help them with it. They might be nervous about having to speak up if something isn't as promised, but they don't want to say it in front of the whole group. So dealing with that expectation would be to make sure people know that they can let you know if they need any help or if they need to share with you. For the guide, they might be concerned that the guide will be respectful. Maybe the person is the guide is a male and the guest is a female. She might want to know that she'll be treated with respect. The guide will care about the needs of the guest. So again, a lot of these, if you know that these might be expectations, you need to be thinking about ways to convey all of these. For medical issues, the guest might have an injury of some form, and they might be concerned that it's not going to hold up. They don't want to. They're worried their fitness level will hold up the whole group. So these are all expectations you might have to address. So one way to consider exceeding the expectations of your guest is to really map out each section of your trip and identify what the physical and emotional expectations are. So in this case, you're welcome to hit stop on this recording and just copy down this graph here, but it's the basic idea. On the left, you put all the main sections of your trip and the main components to it, like the trip meeting point, the lunch that you're going to have, put the gear that you'll be using, maybe include yourself. And then what are the physical expectations and emotional expectations for each of those? And there might be additional considerations that you put down as well. As I stated earlier about customer service and exceeding expectations, think about your trip not as a series of activities. Research has shown that what happens at the very beginning, the start of the trip, the information that's shared, the tone that's delivered, the presentation of the guide, and any equipment that's used is key. Is a key aspect, as well as that if there's a peak or a capstone section of the trip, and then finally the end. How did you conclude the trip? The research has shown that those three are the most remembered aspects of the trip. And so if you knock those three out of the park, people are going to remember that this was an amazing trip. So that peak aspect is key because, again, if we just have a series of activities that nothing really stands out and you're not having a journey, you're not having that life-changing experience. But if you think about what is going to be the most exciting part of this trip and how do I want to emphasize it leading up to it, and after that part of the trip I want to refer back to it and to reinforce that this was an important part. So again, take that hypothetical mountain biking trip, and maybe there's a specific hill on the journey that is more difficult, but it has a great view at the top. So leading up to it, you can say, all right, this trip has a certain amount of elevation gain throughout, and we're going to peak out at 3,000 meters. And then at that point, we're going to have a great view. And so every time we're going up a hill, just know that we're moving closer towards that great view. Then you consider after that peak has concluded and you've got this great downhill going on, you can stop every once in a while and say, wow, you guys really worked hard to get up that hill, and now we're getting that benefit. Remember how great that view was. Then you finish off the trip and you reflect on what just happened. Hey, remember you guys worked really hard getting up that hill, and we had this really fantastic downhill that we were able to experience. And then now here we are at the end, and guess what? It's time to go grab beers or dinner or whatever it is. And so that's really looking at the journey of a trip. So how to go above and beyond, because that's really our goal here at Great Guides. Our goal is not to just meet people's expectations and have a mediocre experience. We want to exceed it. We want to knock it out of the park. So first thing, you have to set clear expectations. What will happen when, and if that's going to change because we're in a very dynamic industry, update frequently. Hey, I said that we were going to have lunch at noon today. It turns out we're running about 30 minutes behind schedule, so I've made arrangements for the lunch to actually happen at 12:30. Or we were supposed to go on this hike today, but the weather has changed and we're now going to go to plan B this time, which will also be awesome. It's just going to be different than what we said. It's really important to understand, why is the guest there? What was their understanding of signing up for this trip? What are they looking forward to accomplishing themselves? So ask why they took your trip. If you can, adjust the itinerary to include or highlight the items they mentioned. And sometimes the marketing and the people sign up for something and they thought it was going to be one thing and it's not. And you just need to be honest that if that's not able to be accommodated, then be honest and upfront and do so early on in the trip so you have plenty of time to win them over. Some of the itinerary doesn't need to be shared, though. I mean, think about surprises and highlights that maybe will be a pleasant surprise for them and something that they weren't expecting. And then all of a sudden, like, for example, if it's legal in where you are guiding, if you've got a great view as part of the trail, maybe pull out some local wine or have a snack that is special to the area. I mean, those little details are the things that really exceed expectations and when people aren't expecting them. Finally, guide with empathy. And so what that means is that you're getting inside the head of that person. You are putting yourself in their shoes. If it's the first time that you were in this location, what are the things that they would be wondering? What would they be worried about? And a lot of times, to understand that, you just have to ask lots of questions. You have to ask people how they're feeling, what their perception is. So on that point about asking questions, what should you ask? What are some of those questions that are going to help you understand the guest and where they're coming from? Well, the first, as I've already stated, is why'd you sign up for this trip? Very important question to ask, because again, if they signed up for something that's not going to happen, you need to know that right away and make accommodations for it. Also, where do you come from? Tell me a bit about who you are. What's important in your, if they're from a different country, what's important in their country or their community? This is helpful because then you start to get to know what their expectations might be because of the things that they say at this part. Also important to know, have they ever done the activity like this before? So if you're going on a multi-day backpacking trip, trekking trip, and they've never done anything like that, you can imagine that they're going to have some degree of anxiety about it. Or if they've done it numerous times before and whatever you're offering is very beginning level, you might have some expectations that they're going to think that this is way too easy, and you might have to make some accommodations or at least let them know ahead of time. It's also helpful to know what the best trip they've ever been on and why. That'll help you know what their basic expectations are. It'll help you know what types of things they focus on. So, for example, if they say, "Oh, we went on this amazing trip in gorilla trekking, and we were able to we learned a ton about the ecosystems that these gorillas live in." Well, that might say that these folks are going to be interested in learning more about the nature or the wildlife of your area. If they say, the best trip we ever went on was this culinary tour of Tuscany. Okay, well, they might be more interested in the food and the culture. It's also helpful to know what their worst trip was. And again, most specifically, why. Oh, we went on this trip and the guide left us behind and we had to fend for ourselves. Well, these guys might need more hand-holding. They might need to have you checking in on them more, because their perception is that the guide left them behind, when maybe the guide thought, oh, I'm going to give them some space to relax or whatever. Where else have they traveled? If they were just on that trip in South Africa and they're visiting you in Chile now, that would be useful to know. If this is their first time, a lot of Americans don't always travel outside the country, and it's a big deal to get outside the U.S. in some cases for some people. If this is their first time ever leaving the country, you can bet they're going to have a lot of anxiety. They're going to have a lot of questions. They're going to need you to pay closer attention to them. I also like to think if our objective is to get to that higher level, the self-transcendence and the personal transformation, is start thinking about connecting this activity to their day-to-day back home. So they're about to just climb a huge hike peak with you on their trekking trip, that's going to be an opportunity for them to gain some self-confidence. So think about what some of their goals might be for next year. How can they start thinking about that on this trip? And again, this goes back to that peak end rule. So people are going to be really focused on making, they're going to have a greater experience if you're packaging this as one journey, not just a series of events. One thing to think about is, in addition to the formal activities, itinerary items where you're doing a presentation or teaching things, or you have a specific activity, a lot of the transformational aspects in travel happen when there's nothing formally planned. And you can actually curate those experiences to maximize that positive and life-changing experiences. So think about filling those gaps in meaningful ways. So you've got your formal itinerary items like morning briefing and interpretive stops, and you have tours, but you have non-formal itinerary areas as well. So maybe you're taking a van from the hotel to the trailhead. You could just sit there quietly. You could have small talk during that time, or you could play some local music so that people feel a greater connection to the culture. You could ask people a question upon departing to have them discuss with their neighbor. Similarly, other what we call white spaces or non-formal areas would be self-exploration at a historical site. It could be time during activities or free time in the evening. Also meals. So again, you can just leave that to be non-planned activity time, or you can insert some of these components to keep even those white spaces, those down parts of the itinerary still fulfilling, still meaningful. So let's kind of dive into some of those. So van ride to trailhead. So playing local music prior to departure, encourage the guests to think about their goals for the trip. You've got free time at an overlook. Encourage guests to reflect on their upcoming year. Have them list items to look for when you get to the summit. So this would be great if you've got a mixed level group and you're going to pick up the rear on a section of the hike. You're not going to be at the summit to point things out to them, but you still want it to be meaningful because you're going to stay behind and work with the slower group. Self-exploration at a historical site. So you could have them explore, imagine they were there when the site was modern. Biking during the bike ride or during the hiking when maybe you're not doing a formal activity, give them small groups to discuss with, give them questions to discuss in small groups or with individual travelers. And at the end, tell them that you're going to ask for them to list off things that they've noticed. So they are paying attention more while they're biking. They're not just focusing on the adventure activity, but they're connecting more to the place as they travel. So again, this is another worksheet that you could do to map out your specific times during the trip. And so, and this is a way for you to focus on the physical and the emotional expectations, as well as thinking about how to fill those white spaces or those non-programmed spaces. So at the top line is the action. So in the activity, that would be the morning briefing. So think about what is the customer expectation during that time, that they're going to learn about what's happening during the day, that they're going to get some basic content. Perceived threat could be that that they're not going to accomplish, that they're not going to be able to get to do the activity that they're most excited for that day or that you had advertised. The opportunity to exceed the physical expectation, maybe have some snacks there. So have something, have some warm coffee or tea for during the morning briefing. And opportunity to exceed the emotional expectation is to come prepared knowing what some of the anxieties of your group might be, and you can alleviate that. The desired emotion that you'd want that guest to have is you want them to be excited and pumped for the day. So then you move on to the white space. So the time between the morning briefing and when your first activity would begin. So the action there would be the time going back to their room to prepare their gear and their items for the day. So the expectation is that they're going to have enough time to do that. Perceived threat would be that they're going to bring too much or too little items, that they're going to be late. And the opportunity to exceed the physical expectation would be to provide them with a gear list for them to assemble, and be very clear about the time and meeting location for the activity. The opportunity to exceed the emotional expectation, again, thinking that they're going to be concerned that they're not going to be capable to do the activities for the day. You can tell them in the briefing for them to think about what they might be most challenged with, and that when you come back together to meet, that you know that. And so the emotion evoked would still be that excitement for the activity, the confidence that they're going to be able to do it. So think about putting together charts like this for your trips. It's really going to help you identify both what the activities and all these expectations are, as well as these non-programmed times that are really key opportunities to that's where you exceed the expectations. So that concludes this first module for the basic onboarding of guides. Again, this is a lot of content. I would assume that a lot of this information is not new to you, that you already know this, but maybe some of it was new. Maybe you have questions about it. Maybe you disagree with how I presented this or some of the concepts, or I'm not emphasizing things that you think should be there. That's great. I want to hear from you. We're in this together. We're going to grow this company together, and this is going to be a great opportunity for you. So please reach out to me via email. Obviously, get to know the Great Guides website, get to know other guides, and feel free to follow me on Twitter if you want to hear about the different things in the travel industry that I'm sharing. So thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be working with you, and welcome aboard.